Coming up on building a Protogen from scratch, tonight we cut some LEDs in half, glue our hands to some plastic, and attempt to untangle some spaghetti. Hi, I'm Waffles, and in this episode of building our own Protogen, we're going ahead and wiring up all of the electronics together. In the previous episode, we went ahead and set up the computers needed to display the face, and in this episode, we wire it all together and somehow fit it in the head. Our goals this episode are to attach some LEDs, finish the side panels, and then get it all wired up. The problem is that we have all these random electronics, and somehow we need to hook them all together and then fit them inside the head. To solve this, we are going to first mount the computer inside of the head, then hook up the LEDs to power the cheeks, next wire all of our fans together, and last hook up everything to a battery. There's only one problem though. I don't know about you, I've never soldered anything before, and we're going to have to learn from scratch. If you've ever wanted to build your own fursuit, or if you just want to see this fursuit finished, go ahead and check if you're subscribed. Even just liking this video is a great way to show your support, and it's your support that helps get this Protogen finished. Now, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we need to knock out is mounting a computer inside of our head. In the last episode, we put together this monstrosity, a Raspberry Pi running Linux used to power the displays, and the original plan was to somehow cram that inside of our head. The problem was that it was just slightly too large, so to solve this, I went ahead and purchased a much smaller Raspberry Pi. This computer is about half the size of our original Model B and about 4 times as slow. Now, we don't really care about the performance, as the only thing that it affects is our boot time. The only real downside though is that we need to manually solder on the GPIO headers. Attaching this header allows us to reconnect our matrix driver board that powers the displays. This was some of the first soldering I did this project, and honestly ended up being the hardest. There are 2 rows of 10 pins each that all need to be soldered together while carefully making sure that they only touch 1 pin at a time. I ended up having to reflow these connections several times to fix bugs, but in the end it wasn't too bad. Sometimes, when learning a new skill, I like to try and tackle the hardest part first because I know if I get that done, the rest should be easier. We also soldered a jumper cable on the display board that should stop the screens from flickering. You can still occasionally see them flicker on camera, but this isn't noticeable to the human eye. Instead, this is just an issue with the display's refresh rate matching up with the camera shutter speed. Now that we've rebuilt our computer, we can go ahead and give it a base plate. For this part, we're using the same plastic mesh we used to attach the displays. I'm a big fan of working with this material because it's easy to cut with scissors and doesn't block off any airflow. So now that we have a new brain for Protogen, the next step that we need to do is figure out how in the world we're going to mount it inside this head. And if you haven't figured it out already, the plan is we're going to somehow sneak it inside this little pocket right here. The first step to getting that done is we're going to cut out an oval backing piece using this plastic here, and then glue that on the inside. Then we can use a whole bunch of magnets to hopefully just stick it right in, and that should mount our computer on the inside of our head. So I've gone ahead and glued in our base plate here. I did make one small mistake though, and that was not cutting holes for all the wiring, so I'll have to do that off camera. But the next thing that we're going to need to do is to mount our little computer. The way we're going to do that is we're just going to super glue the bottom of it, attaching the magnets to the inside of this. And that hopefully should make this a really good little mounting point so that we can take this in and out whenever we want and have plenty of room for all the wiring. Now, we can go ahead and start the process of routing all the cabling inside the head. We're beginning with the power cable for the displays because before it was plugged directly into the wall. Now these cables will run behind the screens, through the cheeks, and then out the back. The general plan is to connect up everything nice and neat and then have all the power cables terminate at the back of the head. A skill that separates the amateurs from the pros is clean cable management. Sure, anyone can just kick all the cables under their desks, but it takes a true artisan to make all that spaghetti look good. So now that we've gotten the basic wiring done, we can go ahead and talk about solving the next problem, and that's adding the LED lighting for each of the little side panels here. The way we're going to do it is kind of scuffed and kind of gross, but it should totally work. I went on Amazon and I bought some really cheap USB LEDs. People use these for like gaming computers or like TV setups or whatever. But what we're gonna do here is hopefully cut them in half, put a little strip on the inside here, put a little strip on this side, and then just connect them to the Raspberry Pi's built-in USB plug. Hopefully it all should work perfectly fine. The only hard part is going to be cutting this guy in half, having two little LED sections on each side. So let's go ahead and get started and start with the basic wiring. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is run the power cable for the LED lights. This is going to connect your light strip to the PC's USB port to the other side of the head. After verifying that it still works, we can go ahead and cut the lights in half. This will give us two sections of lights, one for each half of the head. Now, all we need to do is solder the two halves together, leaving us a gap in the wire with no lights on it that will run behind the displays. So now that we've gotten these wires soldered together, we can hopefully test them out. So let's turn on our battery here. And wow. I don't know about you, YouTube chat, I am shocked that worked first try. There's one small problem though. I forgot to add I think it's called the heat shield or the heat shrinks. So we're probably gonna have to split these guys apart and slip those over and then just shrink them on. But I'm shocked this works. It looks very sketchy and kind of goofed, but now we can go ahead and pack them in our little earpieces here. If you've never soldered before, it's surprisingly fun and easy. To start, all you need to do is strip the ends of your wires using a tool called a wire stripper. Then you can take the two metal ends and twist them together, making sure to put your heat tubing on first. Next, using your solder gun, you want to make sure to heat the wire from the bottom and melt your solder from the top because it'll cause the solder to flow through the wire, giving you a much better connection. Once you've tested everything, go ahead and slide the heat tube over the exposed metal and give it a little fire to seal everything shut. To attach our LED strips, I simply hot glued them to the inside edge of the cheeks. Not only does this help hide the wiring, it also gives us a pretty cool lighting effect too. So now that we've gotten our LEDs mounted, we can talk a little bit more about how they work. This is just a cheapo set and they come with this basic remote and this controls like color and if they flash or not, basic stuff like that. One small mistake I made when buying these LEDs is that this remote is just ever too slightly big to fit inside this hole. So we're gonna have to use our new electronics abilities to rip this thing apart and make it a lot smaller and somehow fit it in here. Then once we get that done, we can finally start talking about the cover pieces that's gonna cover this whole mess. Man, this remote ended up being real ugly, but it has everything that we need on it and is small enough that we can easily fit it inside the head. It has full RGB support, it's wireless, and has an over-engineered magnetic mount just like everything else. So YouTube chat, if you ever want to know why these videos take so long to make, let me give you a good example. I'm currently doing the wiring for the fans that sit inside of the ears here. I went ahead, tested both of them, then stripped off the ends of the cables, and I'm doing the wiring. This one right here works perfectly, giving it juice, fires up the fan. This one right here, it just doesn't work at all. I tried a ton of different things. I tried restripping the cables, I tried a different battery, I tried everything you could think of, and it just doesn't seem to work. So that means the only way to fix it is to completely remove the ear, remove all the padding here, remove the little grate thing, replace the fan, and then put it all back together. I don't know why, but it's a huge pain in the butt, and I'll do it off camera, but this is just another example of something that should have taken me 5 to 10 minutes is now taking me a whole day or two. It's a huge pain in the butt, but in the end, we will get this fursuit done. While we fix our ears, let's go ahead and talk about the next thing that we need to do in order to finish our Protogen, and that's adding the caps over the cheeks. One of the distinctive elements of Protogens is their unique cutie marks or logos that are illuminated on the side of their head. I wanted our logo to be something techy and simple, so here are a few cardboard examples I made before settling on the final version. Okay, YouTube chat, let me tell you the story of how we went from this first design to our final design and all of the incredibly painful lessons we had to learn along the way. The very first thing I did was I created a template just mapping out the relative size of the hole in the side of the head. I basically use this to base everything off of, and it kind of screws us over way down the road. The first plan is that we were going to use spray paint to kind of get our logo design and then map that out using our opaque plastic. Here's a really rough version I made originally. It was pretty goofy, but the idea was just to test out the materials just to see if the idea would work. And then I tried to come up with some more final versions. So here's one that I made using spray paint that didn't really work at all. When it ended up drying, it ended up peeling off and just total failure. But the second one ended up being a lot better and honestly one of the best that we created. So this was done with spray paint over a layer of primer with a bunch of gloss on top of it, and it worked quite well. The only problem was I wasn't super happy with it. If you look really closely, the logo is still kind of scuffed and it needed to make a second one, so I figured no big deal, we'll make one more. So while waiting for this guy to dry, I went ahead and messed around with some different materials. I first tried a really powerful black marker, like a Sharpie, but way more powerful. And as you can see, it looks pretty good. The idea was really just to mess with materials, and I think for that, it worked kind of cool. Next, I made a different version using a Posca paint pen, and this too worked out surprisingly well. The logo is way more crisp because I can use a ruler to get the lines laid perfect. And if you don't know this, with paint pens, like Posca pens, if you use rubbing alcohol on a hard surface, you can erase it really easily. So like if you get it on this table or on this plastic, you just give it a little squirt with rubbing alcohol and you can just wipe the Posca paint away to make sure that you can redo parts. And it was at this moment that I also realized that our original template that we made a long time ago is just not right. This is really frustrating. This is a classic example of check your measurements twice because this piece here was totally wrong, so I ended up having to make a brand new one. And then finally, with this piece here, I was able to make the final version you see at the end, and then with that, I simply added some paint to the back. The whole process ended up taking several days. It was a huge pain in the butt, and this isn't even close to all the different side pieces I made. But the most important takeaway with this whole thing is that with persistence and really trying over and over again and improving yourself, you can end up with some pretty satisfying results. To take a break from talking about the side panels, let's knock out some more wiring. Now that we have the computer and display done, we can instead turn our attention to the fans at the back of the head. Just like before, we're going to strip and solder all of these wires to make them long enough to plug into our battery. Wiring is one of those things that people either love or hate. A helpful tip is to start at one end and to slowly work your way to the other, tidying up as you go along. Zip strips and Velcro are your best friend, and it's incredibly satisfying seeing everything come together in the end. Now that we have the wires out of the way, we can go ahead and figure out how to mount our cool little cheek pieces to the head. The plan is to attach small plastic tabs to the inside of the opening, then we can super glue magnets to it. In order to hold our plastic tabs in place while the glue dries, I'm just using a wad of tape stuck to the inside of the head. Sometimes it's not about being pretty, and instead it's just about getting the job done. This is basically the same process we used for the visor, and it worked pretty well there, so I'm hoping it'll work really well here too. Once the glue is dried, we can go ahead and finish by attaching magnets to the back of the plastic from before. These side panels turned out looking lovely, even if they were a colossal pain in the ass to make. Now we can move on to the last remaining task we have for this episode, and that's creating the charging cable for a Protogen. All we need to do is get it soldered together and cleaned up. With our big long cable done, we can officially call the wiring done for our Protogen. What that means is that we can take any one of these cables and simply plug it into our battery to turn it on. This means that we can basically control the entire Protogen from this battery pack here. I don't know if you've ever used a smartphone where the charging cable is just a hair too short, but it's really frustrating. So I went ahead and made this cable really long so that whenever you take the head off and on while fursuiting, it's actually quite easy. The eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that there's a slight problem with our battery where we only have 2 ports, but we have 5 cables, but nonetheless, I've actually ordered a second battery. Not only that, we can plug in all of our fans into it, giving us the option to turn off all our fans on and off, which is a single button click. The other big exciting thing, now that we have the wiring done, is that we can now try on the head with all of the electronics and LEDs running while wearing it. So all I'm going to do is take our battery pack and extra wires here and stick them in my back pocket. In the future, I have an idea where we're going to have like a belt on or something like that to keep all of the batteries contained, but the only thing we have to do left now is to go ahead and put the head on just like a helmet. So what do you think, YouTube chat? I don't know about you, but I'm thinking this is like pretty darn cool. So now that we have all of the wiring done for our Protogen, we can quickly talk about the last remaining project that we have before we can finally call our Protogen head done, and that's furring the head. In the next episode, we're going to talk about patterning everything out, cutting out all of our pieces, and getting all the fur attached to the ears and the head. It's the last major thing that we need to do before we can finally call our Protogen finished. So with all that being said, I thank you guys again so much, and I can't wait to see you guys again soon.